On the outskirts of Booneville, Mississippi, where dirt roads were still gravel-lined and weeds grew wild along the parking lots, there was an old trailer park. Chipped paint peeling off the walls, tin roofs rusted, and echoing like tiny drums whenever it rained. And there, in trailer number 9, lived a 13-year-old girl named Nora Mayfield. Nora wasn't like the other kids. She wasn't loud, didn't burst out laughing at cartoons, and never asked her mother why the sky changed colors at sunset. Nora lived in her own world, a world where sound was the main language and silence meant safety. From a young age, Nora had been diagnosed with mild autism. She wasn't good at verbal communication. Instead of answering questions, she would often gaze up at the ceiling or echo strange sounds, a snippet of an old radio jingle, the hum of a ceiling fan, or the rhythmic footsteps of her mother coming home each night. Adults whispered, "She's odd," behind her back. Kids called Nora the robot girl. But to her mother, Nora was the most precious gift that life, despite all its cruelty, had left behind. Before we continue following Nora's extraordinary journey, if you too believe that a person's true worth lies not in appearance or circumstance, but in resilience and relentless passion, then please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. That way we can spread more stories that inspire those who need them most. And now let's return to the story, where unexpected things are still waiting ahead. Angela Mayfield, Nora's mother, was a thin woman who often tied her hair with an old rubber band and worked the night shift as a nurse at a nursing home 40 minutes away by car. After every shift, she would return home around dawn, bringing with her the scent of antiseptics, dark circles under her eyes, and a discounted loaf of bread gifted at the end of her shift. She never complained, not because everything was fine, but because she didn't want her daughter to see her broken. They lived simply. No cable TV, no Wi-Fi. Just an old radio sitting by the kitchen window. Every early morning before leaving for work, Angela would turn it on, the music broadcast for working-class folks. Some days, it was Johnny Cash. Some days it was Patsy Cline. And sometimes it was an old gospel hymn her mother used to sing when she was alive. Nora never said, "I like this song." But whenever the old tunes played, she would close her eyes and gently sway and sing along. Not loud, not clear, just like the whisper of wind slipping through a crack in the door. But Angela heard it, and her heart trembled, because that voice was something special. No training, no technique, no effort to sound better than anyone else. Just a strange kind of rawness, as if that voice wasn't coming from her mouth, but from a memory. One Wednesday afternoon, while Angela was doing laundry behind the house, 2 teenage girls from the neighborhood walked by. They giggled and whispered something about the talent contest at Town Hill Plaza next week, and the weird girl who can sing like a radio. Angela didn't pay much attention, just frowned slightly. That evening, while her mother was washing dishes, Nora shyly walked over and placed a piece of paper on the table. It was a confirmation form for entry in a local singing competition. Under the section for contestant name, someone had scrawled her name, messy handwriting almost mocking. Angela looked at her daughter, about to ask if someone was playing a joke. But then she caught Nora's gaze. Not scared, not angry. Just a slow, gentle look as if the girl were asking, "Can I try, Mom?" Angela didn't respond right away. She simply pulled over a wooden chair, sat down beside her daughter, and took her tiny hand. Nora's hand was cold, her nails bitten down. But when Angela held it tighter, Nora didn't pull away. She whispered, "If you want to sing, I'll be there to listen, and I'll be there with you." That night, Long after the other houses had gone dark, Angela stood silently outside her daughter's bedroom. Through the slightly ajar door, she could hear Nora practicing Amazing Grace, the version that had played on the radio one winter morning the year before. The girl sang each line, each word with painstaking care, as if she were picking up shards of glass that someone else's heart had shattered. And Angela, for the first time in years, cried without a sound. She didn't know what would happen at the contest, but she knew one thing. That voice deserved to be heard, even if just once. After placing the talent show confirmation form on the kitchen table, Nora said nothing more. She quietly returned to her room, closing the door so softly it didn't make a sound. But inside, Angela, a flood of thoughts surged like an underground current. Perhaps like many seasoned mothers, she felt both joy and fear. Angela knew well that her daughter was not like other children. Nora didn't understand sarcasm, sidelong glances, or the loud laughter that the world often reserved for those deemed different. She only responded to sound with a sincerity so deep it was heartbreaking. Angela had seen her daughter burst into tears at the slam of a door freeze for hours because the siren of a passing ambulance didn't stop soon enough. But that same girl could sing entire passages from old recordings with perfect pitch and timing, as if the melodies had already been woven into her soul. 3 nights after receiving the confirmation letter, Angela noticed something strange. Every night at exactly 9 p.m., Nora's bedroom light would go out completely, but a faint sound would begin under the thin covers, the voice of Nora very soft, very trembling, yet steady, as if whispering to herself. Not singing to perform, not singing to be praised, just to exist. One evening after a long shift at the nursing home, Angela came home, her body aching. But instead of going to her room, she stood by Nora's door, silent. The girl was softly singing each line of Amazing Grace, her voice as thin as mist, but full of emotion. When she reached the line, "That saved a wretch like me," Nora stopped, then sang it again, and again, as if trying to find just the right feeling that the old song was meant to carry. Angela didn't go in. She was afraid she might make her daughter retreat back into that familiar shell where no one was allowed to reach her. So that night, she sat outside the door until Nora stopped singing. She said nothing. She just listened. The next morning, while Angela was reheating some soup, Nora unexpectedly approached and placed a small notebook on the table. The corners were worn, the paper edges frayed. Inside were slanted lines written in pencil, lyrics. "So I won't forget when I'm standing in front of people." Angela looked at her daughter. Nora didn't explain, didn't need to. Angela understood. It was the fear that anyone who has ever stood on stage carries with them. But for a child like Nora, stepping onto that stage wasn't just bravery. It was a miracle. That evening, instead of letting her daughter sing alone, Angela pulled a chair into her room, bringing with her the old radio and a handkerchief embroidered with the letter M, the only thing left from her own mother, who used to sing hymns at a Baptist church 2 states over. She placed the radio on the desk and played the 1950s recording of Amazing Grace. The voice was a little crackled, but full of unwavering faith. When the melody began, Nora didn't sing right away. She just sat still, eyes closed. Angela said nothing. She simply placed a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder and gave a small squeeze. A moment later, Nora began to sing, not trembling this time. Still soft, still careful, but clear and certain. That voice wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to remember. It was the sound of memory, of nights singing lullabies in the dark during power outages, of walking in the cold to church, just to hear the Christmas choir of a heart that had never truly been heard, yet sang as if the whole world were listening. Angela didn't say anything when the song ended. She just took the handkerchief and gently dabbed her eyes. She didn't need to say, "You sang beautifully." And Nora didn't need praise. The only thing both of them needed was each other in silence, in music and faith. The contest would take place next Saturday at Town Hill Plaza. Beneath fluorescent lights and promotional announcements over loudspeakers, there would be a little girl standing on stage, no dazzling outfit, no backing music, just the voice of a heart that had never told a lie. And her mother would be in the front row, not just to listen, but to witness the miracle she had always believed was real. On Saturday morning, the town of Boonville woke under a pale gray sky. The rain from the previous night had left streaks of water pooled across the patched asphalt roads. But in trailer number 9 at the mobile home park, the lights had been on since early dawn. Angela had gotten up before sunrise. She boiled water, made a bit of peppermint tea, and gently woke her daughter. Nora, as usual, said nothing. She simply nodded and slipped into a white dress that her mother had pressed the night before. The dress wasn't new, but it was the nicest one they had, left a gift from a distant aunt 3 years ago. Angela tied her daughter's hair back into 2 neat braids, just like when Nora was in kindergarten. Once everything was ready, she stepped outside and took a deep breath, inhaling the chill of the early morning air as if to steady herself. Today was the day her daughter would step out from the quiet shadows, not to stand out, but simply to be heard. Town Hill Plaza Mall began buzzing with activity at 9 a.m. Beneath the main atrium skylight stood a temporary wooden stage covered in black fabric, flanked by colorful flags on both sides. Banners that read "Young Voices," "Preliminary Round," were strung between racks of discount merchandise. Spectators crowded around the stage, parents curious shoppers, even a few store clerks sneaking a peek during their break. Children in sparkly dresses and monogram shirts laughed and ran around. Some people held up signs printed with photos of their children or grandkids. Angela and Nora stood backstage near the registration area. The event coordinator handed Nora a paper name tag and asked, "Do you have a backing track?" Angela was about to respond when Nora gently shook her head. "No, ma'am. I'll sing a cappella." The coordinator raised an eyebrow, then made a note on her clipboard. The acts began one by one. A boy played Country Roads on a ukulele. A 9-year-old girl sang a Disney song with a wireless mic. Then a trio of sisters performed a gospel number with a full backing band. The audience clapped politely, some whispering among themselves. Photographers and videographers moved around as if this were a grand production. Then it was Nora's turn. The MC, a young man with a headset mic and a well-rehearsed smile, read the next name, with a slight pause in his voice. "Next, we have an unaccompanied solo performance from Nora Mayfield. She will be singing Amazing Grace." A few murmurs rose from the crowd. There was a quiet chuckle. A boy holding a camera muttered, "This should be funny." Nora stepped out, alone. She walked slowly, hands clutching a folded piece of paper. No music, no colored lights, no effects. Just a child standing before the world with no protection but the voice inside her. A white spotlight lit the stage. From where she stood, Nora couldn't make out individual faces, only a blur of eyes and raised phones. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then the voice rose. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Nora's voice floated out light as smoke, fragile as early winter mist. Yet it struck straight into the chest of anyone listening. Not showy, not stylized. Just one thing came through, clearly authenticity. At first, there were still faint coughs, shuffling footsteps. But when she reached the line, I once was lost, but now am found. Everything stopped. A woman holding a baby paused mid-motion, tilting her head. An elderly man fishing for change to buy ice cream looked up frozen. The entire mall seemed to hold its breath. Angela stood at the edge of the stage, gripping the handkerchief embroidered with the letter M. She didn't cry, but her eyes were red. Not because her daughter sang so beautifully, it left people stunned, but because the girl had dared to sing. When the final line rang out, was blind, but now I see. No one moved. There was no applause right away. Only silence, thick and complete. A few seconds later, the first clap echoed, not from the audience, but from an elderly man with silver hair, wearing a checkered shirt, standing beside the discount bookstall. Then came the second. And then the entire plaza erupted. But it wasn't the kind of clapping meant to cheer. It was clapping in gratitude, because they had just heard something so real, it made their hearts tremble. Nora remained still, eyes cast downward, hands clutching the folded piece of paper. But in that moment, beneath 100 stares, she was no longer the odd little girl. She was the one who reminded the world that music doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. As the applause softened, and the audience still looked dazed, as if they had just brushed against something sacred, Nora gave a slight bow and stepped off the stage. She walked slowly, not hurried, not glancing at anyone, but no longer trembling as before. Angela was already waiting in the wings. As her daughter approached, she opened her arms and hugged her tightly. No words were spoken. Amid the noise and flashing lights that embrace, was the only world they needed. The mother and daughter intended to leave right after the performance, avoiding curious glances. But before they could exit the backstage area, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked blonde hair and a small name tag on her blouse approached. She smiled politely, holding a leather notebook and a dangling staff badge. "Excuse me, may I speak with your daughter for a moment?" Angela looked surprised. The woman extended a hand and spoke gently. "I'm Clara Jensen, director of the youth program at the Hope Sound Foundation. I was here today assisting the judging panel, but I heard the girl sing. Not just heard. I felt it." Angela glanced at her daughter. Nora stood still, tilting her head slightly, as she often did when trying to process something unfamiliar or beyond her usual routine. Clara continued, her eyes fixed on Nora. "I used to work on a music project for children with autism. I understand that for some souls, sound is the only language they know to reach others." Angela was speechless. She hadn't told anyone about Nora's condition that day. But somehow, this woman understood. "I'm not here to pressure you," Clara said slowly. "But I do hope you'll consider this. We're offering a 6-week summer scholarship program in Nashville. Students will receive vocal training, ear training, and professional performance coaching. All expenses are covered if accepted." Angela looked at Clara, then at her daughter. I don't think she'll be able to adjust," she said, voice nearly a whisper. "She's never left town, never been on a long-distance bus. She's not like the other kids." Clara smiled, not the empty, encouraging kind, but the smile of someone who had once been underestimated and kept going anyway. That's exactly why we need voices like hers. She handed Angela a thick envelope containing program details, a simple application form, and a few evaluation letters. Finally, she bent down to Nora's eye level, her tone softening further. "If you want to join us, just sing like you did today. That's more than enough." That evening, in trailer number 9, Angela made 2 cups of peppermint tea. The two sat by the window, listening to the radio play a familiar hymn. Nora was retracing the lyrics of Amazing Grace on the old piece of paper, darkening the letters with a black pencil. Angela placed Clara's envelope on the table and slowly opened it in front of her daughter. No pressure, no explanation, just leaving it there like a quiet invitation. Nora read every line very slowly. When she reached the part that mentioned held in Nashville, she looked up and asked softly, "Mom, will it be far?" Angela nodded. "Far, but that doesn't mean you'll be alone, sweetheart." Nora was silent for a long time. Then she reached out and placed her hand on the envelope. She didn't say yes, nor did she nod, but her eyes said everything. She was ready to take one more step slow, perhaps trembling, but her own. 3 weeks later, a thin, cream-colored envelope arrived from the Hope Sound headquarters, sealed in red. Inside it read, "We are honored to announce that Nora Mayfield has been officially accepted into the 2025 Summer Youth Folk Music Scholarship Program. All travel accommodation and educational expenses will be fully covered. We believe her voice is a gift meant to reach many other hearts around the world." Angela said nothing. She simply sat on the bed holding the letter, eyes brimming with tears. As for Nora, after reading it, she simply whispered, "Mom, when I sing, I don't see the crowd. I just hear the echo from somewhere very far away." Angela gently replied, "That's where music takes us, darling, to a place only those who truly listen can find." Nashville in June felt like the sun was drying out every last trace of old sorrow. The roads leading into the city center gleamed under the southern light, birdsong, blending with the rumble of buses, and the smell of buttered toast drifting past rows of red brick buildings. Nora Mayfield arrived in that city on an early morning. She sat by the train window, tightly holding onto a worn notebook where the lyrics of Amazing Grace were written, along with a few sheet music pages her mother had copied by hand. Her mother, Angela, sat beside her, her hand never letting go of a small cloth bag that held a handkerchief, a few coins, and a pack of homemade cookies. Neither of them had ever been to a big city, but they both knew this wasn't a vacation. This was the journey of a dream, small, fragile, but the first dream Nora had ever dared to call by name. The Hope Sound Foundation's Summer Scholarship Program was held in a historic brick building perched on a small hill, shaded by a century-old oak tree that cast its shadow across the practice yard. Inside were soundproofed classrooms, a modern recording studio, and long corridors lined with photos of past students, their eyes bright with promise. Nora, with all her hesitation, awkwardness, and eyes that couldn't hold a gaze, stood lost among dozens of radiant faces from across the country. Some had studied music since the age of 3. Some had appeared in major musical productions. But there were also a few gentler, more understanding glances from teachers used to children who don't speak much. On the first day, when asked to introduce herself, Nora simply bowed her head and whispered, "I like singing songs without music." A classmate chuckled, but one teacher, Ms. Clara, just smiled and said, "That's more than enough, sweetheart." Nora didn't talk much in class, but during vocal practice, she sang not loud, not powerful, but so honest the room seemed to stop breathing. One day, during a trial session in the recording booth, an older sound engineer named Leo quietly took off his headphones and asked, "Has this girl ever had formal training?" Never, Clara replied. Then, how does she know when to breathe? How does she sing like... Every line is drawn from a memory no one ever taught her. No one had an answer. Only Nora, when asked, gently said, I just sing the way my mom holds me when it rains. The end-of-program recital was held in an old wooden concert hall that seated over 300 people. That day, it rained softly, not heavily, not loud like nature's way of stirring someone's childhood memories. Nora wore a light blue dress sewn by a teacher from 2 old blouses. She wore a small sun-shaped pendant, the only new birthday gift her mother had ever bought her when she turned 10. When her name was called, some in the audience flipped through the program, the song. Just a folk tune, no accompaniment. But when Nora stood in the spotlight, hands gripping the microphone, she saw no audience, no lights, no one at all. Only memory. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Nora's voice wasn't bell-like nor technically refined, but it wrapped around each listener's heart like a mother's hand on a child's back after a fall. In the 3rd row, Angela stood first. No clapping, no cheering. She just stood, hands over her heart. Her eyes misty, her smile glowing like the mornings long ago when she sat listening to gospel hymns on the radio. Then the second person stood. Then the entire auditorium rose to their feet. No one filmed it. No one took pictures. They simply clapped quietly as an instinctive act of gratitude for something pure that had just passed through. The next morning, in a small diner near the train station, Ms. Clara Jensen walked in holding an envelope. The board has decided to grant Nora a full scholarship. No further auditions needed. And if possible, her mother can stay in private housing near the school. Angela was speechless. Nora simply asked, "Can I bring my little radio?" The answer, of course, was yes. Years later, during a television interview, a young reporter asked, "Do you remember the moment you knew you wanted to pursue music?" Nora Mayfield, now a renowned music therapist, simply smiled. "It was the moment my mother stood up. Just her. She didn't care if I sang well or not, only that I dared to sing, and she stood, as if the world needed to see that." And so the story of Nora Mayfield comes to a close, from a quiet girl on the outskirts of town to a voice that made an entire auditorium rise in silent awe. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to help us continue sharing small but extraordinary journeys like this one. We'll see you in the next story, where love and hope always find their way home.